Hey Magic players, this is Ben with MTG Frontier Guide, and today we're doing a deck tech for Splendid Reclamation. Okay, we're going to start things out with 3 copies of Splendid Reclamation. It's a 4 converted mana cost sorcery spell, and it lets you return all the lands from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So we're kind of built around this card here. So it's a lot of fun when you can pull this off and you've got a lot of lands in your graveyard. It helps you ramp really fast. Now, in addition to bringing back lands from the graveyard, we're also bringing back creatures from our graveyard to our battlefield. To do that, we've got 2 copies of Liliana, Death's Majesty. She's a 5-drop planeswalker. Her plus ability lets you create a 2/2 black zombie token, and you get to put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, which helps fuel our reanimation and our reclamation of our lands. Her -3 ability lets you return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it becomes a zombie in addition to its other types. Her negative ability lets you destroy all non-zombie creatures. We're also running 2 copies of Ever After. It's a 6-drop sorcery spell, and it returns 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Each of those also become a zombie in addition to their other types, and then you put Ever After on the bottom of your owner's library. So you can actually get that card back later on in the game. Okay, so next up are the other cards that we're using to get our cards into our graveyard. We've got 3 copies of Vessel of Nascency. It's a 1 green enchantment, and it costs 1 generic and 1 green to sacrifice it. You reveal the top 4 cards of your library, and you get to put either an artifact, creature, an enchantment, land, or a planeswalker from among them into your hand, and then you put the rest in the graveyard. We're also running 4 copies of Grapple with the Past. It's a 1 green, 1 generic instant, and you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, and then you get to return a creature or a land card from your graveyard to your hand. And then we have 3 copies of Cathartic Reunion. It's a 1 generic, 1 red sorcery spell, and as an additional cost to cast it, you discard 2 cards. So you can put 2 relevant cards into the graveyard, and then you draw 3 new cards. Now, to start out our creatures, we have 3 copies of Grim Flayer. He's 1 green and 1 black mana. He's a 2/2 with trample, and then when he deals combat damage to a player, you get to look at the top 3 cards of your library and put any number of those into your graveyard, and then the rest back on top of your library in any order. And he's also got Delirium that gives him +2/+2, and that's whenever you have 4 or more card types in your graveyard. So he's really good at setting up your next draws, and he's also really good at getting needed cards into the graveyard. So all in all, he's a great creature to have in the deck. We also have 3 copies of Tireless Tracker. He's 2 generic and 1 green. He's got a 3/2 body, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to investigate, so you get a clue token. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker. What's really nice is when you use a Splendid Reclamation, you've got a lot of lands in the graveyard, and then you bring all of those into play when you have a Tireless Tracker out, and you get a clue for each one of those lands. So he can provide a lot of card advantage if the game goes long. And then we have 1 copy of Mindwrack Demon. It's 2 generic and 2 black, and it's a 4/5 body. It's got flying and trample, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard. Now, the only downside is if you don't have 4 card types in your graveyard, at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 4 life until there's 4 or more. So it's pretty easy, though, with this deck to get Delirium online. And next we have 1 copy of the Gitrog Monster. He's 3 generic, 1 black, and 1 green. He's got a 6/6 body. He's got Death Touch, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice him unless you sacrifice a land. You also get to play additional land on each of your turns, And whenever one or more lands are put into the graveyard from anywhere, you get to draw a card. So whenever you sacrifice that land at the beginning of your turn, you actually draw an extra card off of it. And don't worry about putting lands in the graveyard. We have the Splendid Reclamations to bring them all back to the field again. We're also running 2 copies of Ishkanah, Grafwidow. She's 4 generic and 1 green. She's got a 3/5 body, she's got reach, and her delirium allows her to enter the battlefield, and you get 3 1/2 green spider tokens with reach with her. She also has the extra ability of paying 6 generic and 1 black mana, and target opponent loses 1 life for each spider you control. It's not something that comes up too often, but it can close out the game if the situation is right. So it is a relevant ability that some people do forget about. And next up, we have 1 copy of Noxious Gearhulk. It's 4 generic and 2 black. It's got a 5/4 body with menace, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to destroy another target creature, and then if a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. It's very good for helping stabilize if the other opponent is running some kind of an aggro deck, or just taking out one of their biggest creatures. We also have 1 copy of Combustible Gearhulk. It's also 4 generic and 2 red. It's a 6/6, and it's got first strike. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If they don't, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, and then the Gearhulk deals damage equal to the CMC of those cards to that player. This is great because whether they're putting the cards in your graveyard and you're dealing damage to them, or putting them in your hand, it gives you more fuel, because obviously we don't mind cards going into our graveyard, and we have a lot of big creatures in the deck. So there's a lot of damage that's potential by flipping those 3 cards and putting them into the graveyard. Then we have 2 copies of Omnath, Locus of Rage. It's 3 generic, 2 red, and 2 green. It's got a 5/5 body. It's also got landfall, so when a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Also, whenever Omnath, Locus of Rage, or another elemental you control dies, it deals 3 damage to target creature or player. What's great is whenever you have Omnath out on the battlefield, you play Splendid Reclamation, put a lot of lands out on the battlefield, and then get a whole lot of elementals. It's a lot of fun when you do that. That's what I like doing, and that's a lot of fun with this deck. That's one of my favorite things to do. Now, we don't have a lot of interaction in the deck, but we do have 3 copies of Fatal Push. That's a 1 black mana. It's an instant spell, and you get to destroy a creature if it has converted mana cost of 2 or less. And then if you have Revolt, you get to destroy the creature if it's got converted mana cost 4 or less. It's actually pretty easy to get Revolt with this deck, because we do have a lot of clues, and we also have the enchantments that we get to sacrifice to put stuff in the graveyard and back in our hands. That's also easy to trigger Revolt as well. And then we have 1 copy of Seasons Past. Seasons Past is 4 generic and 2 green. It's a sorcery, and you get to return any number of cards with different converted mana costs from your graveyard to your hand, and then you put Seasons Past back on the bottom of the owner's library. So you can go get whatever you're needing to finish out the game, and then put that card back on the bottom of your library. Seasons Past is a very good card. There was a really good deck that actually won one of the big tournaments that was utilizing Seasons Past, and when you cast it, it is a very good game changer. It refills your hand completely. So, and that's it for our spells in the deck. So we'll move into our lands. And to start the lands out, we've got 4 copies of Smoldering Marsh, and then 4 copies of Cinder Glade. We frequently get our basics out, so these usually can come into play untapped later on in the game. And then we have 4 copies of Blooming Marsh, and 4 copies of Evolving Wilds to go get our basic lands. And we're going to finish out the land base with 2 basic Swamp, 5 basic Forest, and 2 basic Mountains. Now, as usual, your sideboard will be heavily dependent on what you're expecting to face in your local meta, like whatever at your local game store you're expecting to see. Some good options are Jati Offshoot. It's a 1-drop 0/3 that lets you gain life whenever a land enters the battlefield. Radiant Flames if you're expecting to see some aggro decks with small creatures. Dispossesses is one of my favorite cards from the new set. It gets rid of Gearhulks nicely. That's one of my favorite things to use to get rid of Torrential Gearhulk, or even Verdurous Gearhulk if you've got someone running a lot of Verdurous Gearhulks. It can also get rid of an Aetherworks Marvel. However, usually it's a little too slow for that. You have to be really lucky but getting it out before they can get the Aetherworks Marvel out. But for that, I like Manglehorn. Manglehorn is a 3-drop. It destroys an artifact when it enters the battlefield, and it causes artifacts to enter tapped, which is really good against something like Aetherworks Marvel. It'll help buy you a turn so they can't activate it the turn they play it. Well, that's our deck tech for our Jund Reclamation. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed it. We definitely want to thank you for watching. If you liked the video, make sure to hit the like button. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Leave us feedback. Let us know if you try the deck out. Let us know what changes that you would make. Let us know if you bring back 10 lands from your graveyard and make 10 5/5 elementals with an Omnath. Just let us know what you want to see on future videos. If you have any other deck requests or anything like that. So we are doing a giveaway soon. I'm gonna do a different video for it. But we are going to give away probably an expedition. So go ahead and make sure if you have anyone else that would like to be included in that, make sure that they subscribe and make sure that their subscriptions are visible. So I'll do a video and explain how that works, and then we'll set up a time to actually do that giveaway soon. So this is for hitting our 100 subs. So we definitely want to thank you again. We couldn't get there without you, and we'll do another one when we get up to like 500 subs, and then maybe another one at 1,000 subs. So if you've got friends that want to be included in the drawings, make sure that they subscribe. So once again, thank you for watching. This has been with MTG Frontier Guide. Get out there, play some Magic, have some fun.